Hello. Morning. Can you hear me? Hi. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks again to Latitude59 for inviting. This has been a little slow cooking marriage with the Estonians. My name is Dario. I run a company called Briter, and I have been asked to talk about the secret sauce about the East African ecosystem, which we all love and brings us all together. Uh, just a couple of things about me. We are a business intelligence company. We started in Africa in 2018, and we now are cutting across 4 continents. We're opening our offices in Mexico and in India soon, and I know that most of you know us through avatars, so I thought maybe you just want to see our faces. Like I just recently put this new slide together so you can see. And as you can see, we're also hiring a lot of roles, so please check out our website. This is our team, and it's scattered across the continent and soon across different regions. So again, I was asked to talk about the secret sauce of East Africa, but often I get asked to talk about the state of the ecosystem and how the story of Africa can be crafted and how we can talk about Africa from Africa to the rest of the world, right? The very idea of Briter, for anyone who's asking, is to talk about the brighter side of what we call underserved markets, right? And so I usually like to start my talks with this slide. Myself, I come from a background in international development, and my ultimate goal in the little purpose that I have in life is to try to make an impact in the way the world perceives what we call underserved markets, meaning markets whose opportunities are not really seen because of a lack of information, right? So recently we've all been in conversation about this funding winter, about the bubble burst, about how valuation have gone from they've gone basically to a fraction of what they used to be a couple of years ago. And so the way I like to start this conversation to cheer us all up is to just look at how the ecosystem attracted funding over the last decade or so. And if you look at the last 10, 15 years, we really went from almost zero, so insignificant amount of funding to a continent of 1.3 billion people, to somewhat around $5-6 billion. Bear in mind, this is not the whole economy. This is our ecosystem, our innovation space. So talking largely about VC. And also this doesn't account for undisclosed transactions because, as you know, many of the capital flows don't really get to the surface. And so when you take any societal change takes time, right? I know we all talk about like Q1 versus Q2 because this is a language they use in finance. But in truth, when you actually take a longer view and a bird's eye view about what happened across the ecosystem, and I can see some people that I've really been in touch with in Africa since I came here in 2016. The change has been tangible, right? We went from almost zero to a few $1 billion injected in hundreds, if not thousands of companies. And this applies to both the number of deals and the activity. And also, just a technicality, my assumption is that if you draw a line and you crop a little bit of 2021, of capital in 2021, and you just put it into 2020 when COVID struck, you can really draw a straight line all the way to 2022. Right? A lot of the transaction in 2020 got deferred. And so in truth, you can assume that a lot of the deals that were made or announced in 2021 were actually coming from the year before. And this is where, I guess, the positive story comes. And also the chart at the bottom, you can see, I try to add some comments around where some of the inflection point happened. But you can see how 2014, 2015, 2016 are at the very bottom, almost invisible. And then you can see the last few years coming up and the number of transaction increase. Not only that, just look at the company since I founded Briter 2018 to 2020. This is a bit of an old slide, but the number, the pattern straight remains. The number of companies that have been able to raise $1 million has more than quadrupled over the last half decade, right? The story is clear, the pattern is clear, no matter what happened over the last couple of years, right? Not only that, and this is where we get into a bit of a conversation about East Africa. As of 2016, obviously there were four or five countries that appear to be more in vogue when it comes to capital attractiveness. And in 2023, there are two things that are striking. One is the volume, so the gravitas that this country have acquired across the continent, but also a significant diversification of capital access across the continent, and on top of that, the appearance of what we call tier 2 and tier 3 markets, such as Morocco, Uganda, Tanzania, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, etc., right? Now, looking at East Africa, it's pretty clear to everyone, Kenya has become, is not only the country that attracts the highest amount of funding, but it's also a country that acts as what we call a regional headquarter. And this is quite the case when you start looking at the expansion patterns and expansion journeys of companies. In East Africa, and I'll get to it in a minute, companies tend to, from Kenya, expand to Ethiopia, Tanzania, Uganda, Burundi, Congo, and Uganda, or Sudan. In West Africa, you have a massive hub, which is Nigeria, but companies from Nigeria do not tend with the same frequency to expand towards its neighboring countries, right? And this creates, this represents quite a limit for companies when it comes to expanding towards new market and even justifying their ability to just be a regional power compared to just a national one. And then we have Egypt, which unfortunately has been surrounded by countries that have had some quite a few political issues and instability over the last decade. And South Africa historically has represented a country of its own, a market of its own. That and one of the interesting, I guess, like point of information about South Africa is that companies that start from South Africa then aspire at expanding to America, Australia, Europe, whereas companies that usually start across East Africa or West Africa tend to expand across the region, right? Now, the change has also been significant across sector over the last 10 years. We went from a fintech-dominated landscape where payments, banking, cryptos were the main recipient of capital to a scenario where there are 3-4 sectors that now appeared, such as climate tech. Now there's COP going on as we speak, and you can see the significant increase in interest and capital flows towards agri, food, climate, clean tech, circular economy, and also more interest towards logistics, cross-border trade, and commerce. And then we had a little peak during COVID where everyone thought health tech would be the next big thing. It didn't prove to be true. Maybe it would be the next big thing, but right now climate and any climate change related debate have really taken the priority. Again, just a bit of a focus on climate tech. One of the interesting thing about Kenya and East Africa is that they are the cradle of some of the big power in the sector. So you have Mkopa, Samking, Delight, and many other organizations that are largely focused on climate that stem from Kenya. But then, so is there a secret sauce, right? I kind of hinted at it throughout the conversation, but I try to boil the conversation down to a few points. One being access to international capital. Kenya historically has been a country that has obviously had the UN headquarters. It's had century-old ties with Britain and the Anglo-Saxon world, which is still, I would say, the region, an abstract term, that deploys the highest amount of capital. So the US, Canada, Australia, the UK. So this has been very favorable for Kenya and the region, having access to such a beautiful international community. It's not a case that Estonia decided to have an event here and not in Cameroon, for instance, right? Nothing to take from Cameroon, but the other aspect is a favorable and progressive law. A lot of the ties of the legal system in Kenya are also similar to Anglo-Saxon systems, but on top of that, the government has been pretty open to the conversation about anything related to ICT, business. It may not be the highest in Africa in terms of, I guess, the ease of doing business. We know that they're trying sometimes take 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, but there has been, comparatively to other countries on the continent, there has been a conversation, an active conversation. Public and private organizations do work together towards this common goal. The other aspect is English and Swahili represent a big strength for cohesion across the region. The fact that there are common languages that are used for business and for, obviously English is the lingua franca across the world, but Swahili has been an important glue for the region, especially now, for instance, as Tanzania is emerging as one of the powerhouses of the continent, as one of the favorite expansion markets across the continent. And then another aspect is that Kenya had the competitive advantage of being a first mover when it came to success stories, right? This is not the full story, and the next slide is gonna remind you of that. But Kenya is the country of M-Pesa, right? I know M-Pesa has become a bit of an old story, but it's still a very relevant story when it comes to digitization of financial transactions and financial inclusions in general. It's still the most sophisticated and most widely adopted system across Africa. It's got interesting stories such as Twiga, such as Wasoko, Coco Network, but many of these, like we can mention many new companies that have come up, and so these I'm citing this because these are, maybe Wasoko isn't the oldest company, but Cellulant is one of them, for instance, being one of the biggest provider of banking software across the continent, and these have been what I call some of the first movers and the success stories that have led Kenya to be, and East Africa in general, to be at the forefront of the conversation on capital access and investment attractiveness across the continent. As we all know, we are undergoing a bit of a weird time, and for a reason that I'll touch upon in a second. But there have also been a lot of companies shutting down. I know there's just a new story about Sky Garden that has been acquired and managed to retain some of the staff, which is a great reminder. But I wanted to show the two sides of the coin in order to show that when we talk about secret sauce, we want to be realistic about whether there is a competitive advantage or there is some dark magic that makes East Africa better or more viable in terms of business than other countries. Something else that I also tend to maybe omit during my speeches is that when you actually look at the Sahel belt and West Africa, which are all the countries that surround Nigeria, which still remains one of the powerhouses of the continent, a lot of these countries are unfortunately still war-torn. They are affected by famine, by terrorism, by civil conflict. And this creates, from an investment perspective, simply a very unstable scenario and a stable environment for businesses to thrive. And this is something that doesn't really happen, with the exception of Ethiopia, which luckily has kind of got its life together recently. The surrounding environment over the last couple of decades of Kenya has been actually a positive story, and countries, as I said, like Tanzania and Rwanda are charting a path as examples for the rest of the continent. Just as I conclude, again, I think East Africa might have been a region that has had I would say, a comparative success when you put it in, as again, in comparison with also other regions in the world. We work across Latin America, across Southeast Asia, and East Africa has been an interesting story to witness. But especially in this day and age, we are seeing a change in narrative. One of the things that I always say about the ecosystem that makes me proud is the fact that over the last decade, the maturity of the debate about what is good and what isn't in business and investment has grown, right? We're now much more critical, we're now much more inquisitive, we're now much more comprehensive in our thinking and in the access to information, thanks to like also organizations like Caleb's Tech Safari and several other media that are really trying to make the difference when it comes to information production. So right now what is happening is that, and East Africa is not immune to this, there's going to be a shift towards a conversation on healthier unit economics. The investors are more conservative and the valuation are more conservative. So a lot of the companies that over the last 2-3 years have entered the stage with very high valuation are now struggling, East Africa included. And as you see, some of the companies have actually, unfortunately, gone under because of this, and they've not been immune to market shifts. The other aspect that is probably still not spoken enough is the over-reliance on foreign capital. It's a double-edged sword being such a thriving multicultural environment like Kenya and East Africa, but most of money still comes from DFIs and still comes from international overseas investors. This means that as soon as market swings come against just capital abundance, as you've seen recently, investors tend to withdraw, and this is what happened over the last basically year and a half. And what we've witnessed has been a drying process of abundant capital from investors, from the Gulf, from Britain, from the US. And a lot of the companies that were in a pathway to fast growth, they've lacked the ability to access this growth capital. And as a result, many have gone down and will still go down over the next few months. And so the conversation is now starting to change towards homegrown capital and LPs, and it's going to have to change towards this because it's critical that the continent is going to be able to mobilize its own cash. There's billionaires and millionaires across the continent. There's phenomenal ICT and infrastructure and manufacture companies across the continent. And even if the numbers are still very low compared to, for instance, the US, there is a market. The continent is a 54-country continent with over 1 billion people, and there is the need to mobilize this. And I think initiatives like this, as we're seeing all across the continent, are contributing to the rise of a healthier ecosystem. This is pretty much from me. I left a few minutes for questions. I don't know if anyone has any, or I can double click on any of the points that I've made. But thank you very much.
Hey, Dario, stay up on stage. I have a few questions for you. As we do that, let's do a stage shift for the upcoming panel. And before we dive into a couple of questions, if you're a speaker on any of the panels, just make sure that you report to that corner over there where you'll get mic'd up. So if you're on the next panel, head over there. A lot of great points in there. And we've had some really good discussions in the past about startup ecosystems and sort of what the last 15 years have been and what the future looks like. There's a lot of founders here or future founders in here who are probably quite interested in like what they should expect over the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that previously we've had almost like US models or Western models dominate what we think startups and VC should look like. What changes do you think we're going to learn from this downturn and this shift up in your funding?
Yeah, so two things that come to my mind straight away. This morning, I'm in a bunch of WhatsApp groups with investors, and one of the things that came up this morning as a contentious, not having yet had coffee conversation is YC isn't the same as it used to be for African companies, right? So the American model still relevant? And despite the fact that there's an over-reliance of capital on American capital, what have American investors shown in terms of behavior to local founders? And one of these behavior, unfortunately, has been stepping out as soon as things get hard. It's a natural reaction. For many organizations, for many investors, African investment is a bit of R&D, right? And as soon as things get hard, you cut on R&D, right? You cut corners, and R&D is one of those, or CSR is one of those. So this to say that the reliance on American investor, I think, is going to change in terms of founders becoming more critical.
Yeah.
Another thing is something that I usually say. When I arrived in Kenya in 2018, there used to be probably, I would say, 15 ride-hailing companies, like SafeBoda, Savvy Rider, Safe Motos, Little Cab, Uber, Bolt. And within a matter of 5 years, there's absolutely no ride-hailing company that is based here, aside from Little Cab, which is a Safaricom-led company. And Bolt and Uber have become the market leaders without the possibility for any local company to compete even remotely with the capital access that you have here, right? And so I think I usually use this as a conversation starter about and this is not because the companies were not good. It's because I guess the resources and the unit economics were complicated, and the resources that like Bolt and Glovo have been raising in the order of $500-600 million. So even if they had dedicated 50 to the African market, like the volume of funding that was going into these industries, especially because for many years the competition was on cutting cost, was a race to the bottom on costs, where basically the rides were subsidized by VCs. It was simply like a lost battle for local players. This has been the case for many organizations across several sectors. But I think this has taught a lot to both founders and investors about being critical about moat, about the potential threats that can come in the market, right? And another conversation I usually have is on B2B. Over the last couple of years, we've seen B2B companies come out of nowhere in every country, on every vertical. And I think some of the companies have gone under, some haven't, and some are actually thriving. But I think we're all waiting and seeing where this market is going, because we see that obviously the market for B2B logistics and commerce is gigantic across this continent. Yeah. But we are still waiting, and I wonder whether it will witness a process as we've seen with ride-hailing for B2B, where there's going to be some dominant players, even maybe international, that are going to come in and going to wipe the market, or not. So I would say all this. Sorry, I took a long route to say that I guess, as I said earlier, the maturity of the debate is a healthy I think achievement for the ecosystem. I think right now everyone, like, there are very few people of those that have been working over the last decade across the continent that are just naive about a lot of the threats that can arise in the ecosystem. I think this is overall a good achievement, a good positive process for the ecosystem.
Totally. And I think it's interesting. We see downturns as these negative things where it wipes out companies and we're like, oh no, is there even anything here? But it's actually like a self-cleansing thing, right? Like you shed out companies that were working well and had good unit economics, and then you cut out the others. So thanks, Dario. That was brilliant. I appreciate it. And I saw the sneaky team slide, which also had hiring roles. So Dario's hiring. Congrats on expanding a team and growing it.